My name is Anna, and I am 25 years old. I work as a nurse in one of the busiest hospitals in the city. Every day, I care for people who are hurt, sick, frightened, and desperate for relief. My work isn't just about medicine or charts. It's about holding a trembling hand, offering a reassuring smile, and sometimes standing beside someone as they take their final breath. My shifts are long, 12 hours or more, and often unpredictable. Some mornings, I watch the first rays of sunlight creep through the tall glass windows of the hospital, painting the sterile white walls in gold. Other times, I work through the still hours of the night, walking through quiet, dimly lit corridors, my footsteps echoing softly while the rest of the city sleeps. It's not an easy life. My feet ache constantly. My back sometimes protests after hours of bending and lifting, and there are nights when my head feels heavy, with exhaustion. But despite the fatigue, I love my job. There's something deeply fulfilling about seeing a patient recover, about watching someone take their first steps after surgery, or seeing a family smile through tears when they hear good news. Those moments remind me that what I do matters. Until last year, my life followed a predictable rhythm. Work, sleep, visit my mother, repeat. I didn't have a boyfriend. And truth be told, I had stopped expecting romance to find me. I lived alone in a small, tidy apartment just a 15-minute walk from the hospital. Most evenings, after finishing a shift, I would head straight home, too drained to do anything except take a hot shower, eat something simple, and curl up in bed. On my days off, I'd sometimes take a train to visit my mother in the small village where I grew up. She's 70 now, a kind but stubborn woman who insists she can manage on her own, even though she appreciates my help with groceries and cleaning. Life was peaceful, but it was also lonely. Sometimes late at night, I would make a cup of tea, turn on a romantic movie, and let myself drift into a world where people met unexpectedly, fell in love, and built beautiful lives together. I wondered if I would ever meet someone who would look at me that way. Someone who would see past my plain brown hair, my modest clothes, and my tired nurse's face. The men I met at work were usually patients, married colleagues, or busy doctors who barely noticed me. It seemed like love was something that happened to other people, not me. Then one crisp autumn morning, everything changed. A new doctor joined the hospital staff, Dr. Michael Harrison. From the very first moment I saw him, I understood why every nurse in the building couldn't stop talking about him. He was tall and athletic, with broad shoulders and the kind of posture that suggested quiet confidence. His hair was thick and brown, his eyes a bright, almost startling shade of blue that seemed to notice everything around him. But what struck me most wasn't his looks. It was his smile. It wasn't the forced, polite kind you see so often in professional settings. His smile was warm, genuine, and it made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Within days, Michael had won everyone over. He treated everyone with respect, whether they were part of the cleaning staff, the cafeteria team, or senior surgeons. He greeted people by name, listened when they spoke, and remembered small details from their conversations. Watching him interact with others was like watching sunlight filter through clouds. Suddenly, everything felt a little brighter. I never imagined he would notice me. I've always been the kind of woman who blends into the background. I keep my hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wear minimal makeup, and stick to comfortable, sensible shoes. Compared to some of the younger, glamorous nurses who always seemed perfectly styled, I felt ordinary. So when Michael began seeking me out for conversation, I was confused. It started with small things, him asking how my day was going or making a lighthearted comment while we worked on the same ward. But then, I noticed he remembered details I had shared in passing. He asked about my mother's garden after I mentioned it once. He asked whether I'd finished a book I had told him I was reading. It was as if he was truly listening, not just making polite conversation. For the first time in years, I felt seen. One rainy evening, after a particularly grueling shift where we had dealt with multiple emergencies, Michael approached me as I was heading toward the exit. "Anna," he said gently, "you look exhausted. Let me drive you home." I hesitated for a moment. I wasn't used to accepting rides from male colleagues, but there was such kindness in his voice that I agreed. The drive was comfortable, surprisingly so. We talked about our families, our childhoods, the challenges of our work. I told him about my mother's stubborn streak, and he laughed in a way that made me want to keep talking just to hear that sound again. He told me about a hiking trip he once took in the mountains, and how the view from the top made him feel like he could see forever. When we reached my apartment building, I didn't want to step out of the car. For the first time in months, I felt light. After that evening, giving me a ride home became a regular thing whenever our shifts ended at the same time. He started bringing me chamomile tea during breaks because he noticed it was my favorite. We began eating lunch together in the cafeteria, choosing a table by the window where we could watch the world outside while we talked. Slowly, I realized my feelings for him were growing deeper. Work no longer felt like just work. It became the place where I would get to see Michael. Then, one sunny Saturday morning, something happened that made my heart skip a beat. Michael and I had the day off, and as we were chatting after our shift, the previous night he smiled and asked, "Anna, would you like to go to the movies tomorrow? There's a new film I think you'd enjoy." I agreed, trying not to sound too eager, though inside I was buzzing with excitement. The next day we watched the movie, then strolled through the city park for hours afterward. The autumn leaves were painted in shades of gold and crimson, falling gently onto the path as we talked about everything and nothing. At one point, I caught him looking at me with a softness in his eyes that made me think, maybe, just maybe, this could be something real. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to imagine a future with someone. I pictured us cooking dinner together in my small kitchen, traveling to new cities, maybe even getting married one day. It felt foolish to think so far ahead, but I couldn't help it. Then, only 3 days later, the ground beneath my feet shifted completely. It was lunchtime at the hospital. Michael approached me, looking unusually serious. "Anna, I need to tell you something important," he said quietly. My stomach nodded. "I'm married," he said. For a moment, the words didn't register. When they finally did, it was like being hit with a wave that knocked the air from my lungs. I stared at him, searching his face for some sign that this was a joke, a misunderstanding. But he looked straight at me, his expression pained but steady. He told me his wife's name was Laura. They had been married for 5 years, but he claimed their relationship was strained, that they had grown apart, that they rarely talked anymore, that they had nothing in common. He said he felt lonely, unseen, unappreciated, but that with me, things felt different. "Anna," he said softly, "you make me feel alive again. With you, I can be myself. You understand me in a way Laura never has." I sat there in silence, my mind a whirlwind of confusion, disappointment, and hurt. I had never wanted to be involved with a married man. The thought of causing pain to someone else, of being the reason a relationship broke, made my stomach twist. A few days later, fate delivered a cruel confirmation of reality. I was at the supermarket, pushing a cart through the produce section, when I heard laughter that sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up, and there was Michael, standing beside a tall, stunning woman with long blonde hair and flawless skin. Laura. Even without an introduction, I knew. She was radiant in a fitted designer dress, her makeup perfect, her hand intertwined with his. They looked every bit the picture of a happy couple, smiling and chatting as they picked fruit together. The sight pierced me like a blade. I turned and left quickly, not wanting them to see me, my chest tightening with each step. By the time I reached my car, tears were streaming down my face. That night, I lay in bed, replaying the image over and over. If he was so unhappy, why did they look so in love? Was everything he had told me a lie? Or was I the one misunderstanding what I had seen? The next morning at work, Michael greeted me as though nothing had changed. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend. "We need to talk," I told him, my voice steady. When I confronted him about what I had seen, he shook his head. "What you saw was just us keeping up appearances. In public, we act happy. But it's not real. With you, it's different." His words left me even more conflicted. Part of me wanted to believe him. Part of me wanted to run. That night, I called my best friend, Sarah, and poured out the whole story. She listened quietly, then said, "Anna, you deserve someone who chooses you completely. Don't settle for being someone's secret." Her words stayed with me for days. When Michael called asking to meet, I agreed, but I knew what I had to do. We met in a quiet park near my apartment. He looked at me with a mixture of hope and worry, but before he could speak, I did. "Michael, I care for you deeply, but I can't continue this. If you're unhappy in your marriage, you need to decide what you're going to do about it. I can't be the other woman in your life." His shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I understand," he said. "You're a good person, Anna. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." We hugged briefly, and then I walked away, tears blurring my vision. My heart ached, but beneath the pain was a quiet strength. I had chosen self-respect over longing. And I knew, deep down, it was the right choice. In the days after I ended things with Michael, the hospital felt different. The corridors seemed colder, the hours heavier. I still saw him sometimes in passing, his polite nods, the occasional lingering glance. But our conversations were reduced to brief, professional exchanges. I kept my focus on patience, on the comfort of routine, and on the quiet satisfaction my work had always given me. But late at night, when the city outside was quiet, and the only sound in my apartment was the hum of the refrigerator, memories came creeping in. I remembered his laughter during our walks, the way he had noticed small details about me, the warm look in his eyes that had once made me feel special. It was hard not to miss that. Yet each time my heart wavered, I reminded myself of Sarah's words. You deserve someone who chooses you completely. To heal, I threw myself into other parts of life. I began visiting my mother more often, cooking her favorite soups, and helping her plant flowers in her garden. She didn't know the full story, but she seemed to sense something had hurt me. One afternoon, as we drank tea on her porch, she said quietly, "Anna, sometimes the wrong people make us believe we're hard to love, but that's never true. You are worth more than you think." I also started saying yes to things I used to avoid: coffee with colleagues, a book club invitation, even a weekend cooking class. Little by little, I built a life that didn't depend on waiting for a message or a glance from one man. The ache in my chest softened. Months passed, and winter melted into spring. One evening, while attending a medical conference, I met Daniel, a paramedic from another city. He wasn't dazzling like Michael, but he had kind eyes, an easy smile, and a way of listening that felt genuine. We talked about our work, about how both of us had seen life at its most fragile. There was no rush, no intensity like a whirlwind. It was gentle, steady, and honest. Over time, Daniel and I grew closer. He never made me wonder where I stood in his life. He never hid me away. And as I stood in the park with him one sunny afternoon, watching children play and listening to him talk about his plans for the future, I realized something. Love didn't have to be dramatic or complicated to be real. Michael had been a chapter in my story, one that taught me the value of self-respect and the courage to walk away. But Daniel, he was a beginning. And this time, I was ready. Sometimes life's hardest goodbyes lead us to the kind of love that feels like home.